I don't know. Just heads up, schedule-wise for human beings, everybody. This seated test is it's Monday, next Monday at 11 o'clock in the morning. So y'all see the people. That's when it's going to be. Did I hit record already? Yeah.
Yes.
And my other reminder would be, if you haven't done your ag lab reports, get those done lab trip reports, get those done as fast as possible so you don't have to worry about them at the same time you're doing everything else.
Yep.
But
is that all you have, Tom?
That was all I had.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was going to say the same thing. The test for seated students, like Tom just said, is going to be next Monday at 11. So for online students, I'm actually going to open the exam starting this Wednesday, the 5th. And that will be open through next Wednesday, the 12th. So you have a whole week there to kind of go ahead and get in and get that taken care of. So I'll be emailing Tom. I'll email everyone the password later today.
Okay.
So that'll be done. Hopefully everyone can make it into campus this time, since everyone's been doing that for all the other exams. So hopefully we don't run into any issues. Another reminder is that your assignment, the Issues in Animal Science assignment, is going to be due this Friday. And I've left it open until like 11:59 p.m. So if you're a procrastinator, you have a little bit of time there on Friday night. But don't forget to turn that in, because those points will be valuable as we come to your final grade. So before I start the review, which is going to be pretty quick because we only have like 3 lectures to kind of review, the test format is going to be the same style that you've seen for the other 3 exams. It's going to be 57 questions, so about the same length that you're used to. So the first 40 questions are going to be on old material. Because it is a cumulative exam, so it's going to cover everything that we've talked about this semester. So again, first 40 questions will be old material, and I would strongly recommend that you review your old exams content for those 40 questions. Definitely go through those in the old exam keys, be familiar with the ones that you missed, refamiliarize yourself with all of that material. And then we're going to have just 17 questions on these last 3 lectures that we did. Sound good? Okay.
And just to clarify, you're not planning on having class this Wednesday, right?
No, because, I mean, there's really nothing I can go over because it'll already be open for the online students. So in case any of them are taking it on Wednesday, then.
No. Okay,
yeah.
I was just letting them know.
Yep, good call, because I forgot to make that announcement. Yeah, so won't have class this Wednesday because I'm going to go ahead and open it up for the online students. So that's why we're going to go ahead and do the review today. And then when we finish the review, if anyone's interested, I thought I'd talk a little bit more about my job and what I do, as Tom kind of alluded to the fact that some of you may want to hear about it or maybe interesting.
You might mention something about those pig jobs that you emailed me about last week.
Yeah, and I guess I'll mention that afterwards, after I kind of talk maybe more about what I do. But remind me, don't let me forget about that.
Okay.
I probably won't, hopefully don't let me forget. So does anybody have any questions before we get started? Any questions on like any of the old material? Any other questions that you maybe missed on old exams that you didn't quite understand why you missed it, or you want me to explain again before we hop into the new stuff? Good. So again, just go through those old exams and make sure you're good with that material. So if everybody's good, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the new stuff. All right. Is that working? Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay. So the first chapter that we covered in this section was chapter 19 on animal behavior, animal welfare, and the environment. And so we talked about how livestock and companion animals will exhibit complex behaviors that can be related to reproduction, caring for their offspring, or in response to any external stresses that they may encounter. And so that is a really important statement to understand and be familiar with, because animals will react to different things in different ways. And so it's really important to understand kind of those three areas that could trigger a behavior. So temperature could be a stress. As we talked about, temperature would be more of a physical stress. So we talked about different types of stresses, and I think I'll go a little more into detail in this later, but there are two types of stresses that animals can have, and that would be a stress that could cause a physiologic response, so a physiologic stress, or a physical stress that could cause a physical response. So temperature would be an example of a physical stressor, and that can cause behavioral responses. So be familiar with those two types of stress, and I'm pretty sure I talk about them later in this lecture as well. So we also talked about aggression and why animals may show aggression and the two different types of aggression. So there's interspecies with an E, and that's behaviors where animals will show aggression towards other species. So for example, if a predator is attacking a herd or something like that, and they show aggression towards that predator, that's interspecies because it's different species. The other type is intra-species with an A, and that's directed towards other members of the same species. So the best analogy, the best little memory thing I have for you there is that intraspecies has an A and same has an A. Don't know if that's very helpful, but that's about all I could come up with to kind of help you remember that. So intraspecies aggression is other members of the same species. So that would be situations where you have territoriality, social hierarchy, where they need to kind of establish a rank and who's on top and who's on the bottom, and then other aggressive behaviors. But so make sure that you're familiar with this slide and that you know which one is which. So there are different examples of intra-species aggression, like we said. So territoriality is one. Another example would be social hierarchy. And so social hierarchy is extremely important because it's basically kind of establishing a pecking order. And so sometimes birds can kind of do this, which is kind of where I think pecking order comes from. So this is extremely important in species that are very social and that could be group housed. And this is extremely important because it maintains stability and reduces the chance of injury to the group. And I will say that this is extremely important because, for example, like in pigs, I've seen it, when they are moving from like a situation where they've maybe been in individual crates to a pen situation where all of a sudden you've got 10 females that are in there together, there's going to be a lot of fighting going on until they kind of work this order out, this social hierarchy. So it's very important to understand what that means and that aggression can come along with establishing that. So it can be maintained by the dominant animal showing aggressive behavior and then the subordinate animal showing that they're submissive. So again, examples could be like a lead dog in a pack, chickens, and then pigs at weaning. Like we talked about, pigs at weaning are going to get mixed in with other pigs that are not their litter mates. So they kind of have to reestablish that order. And once that's established, then it's really no problem from there on out. But be familiar with this term because you'll see that. So we also talked about testosterone and how that can affect aggression. So testosterone, as we discussed earlier, is the male hormone when it comes to reproductive behavior, but it can also really affect aggressive behaviors. And there are a lot of reasons why that's thought to be the case. Another good thing that kind of backs up that assessment is that castrated males are typically more calm. They're a little bit less aggressive. And so that's kind of important to know. So typically if you have an animal that's completely an intact male, he's going to be a little more aggressive because he's having more hormone, more of the testosterone hormone kind of circulating and being produced in his body. So make sure you know testosterone can affect aggression and cause aggression. So these are just some examples of intraspecies aggression that we went through. Lots of different examples. I mainly just kind of want you to be familiar overall with what intraspecies aggression is and kind of that social hierarchy is a part of that and what. So reproductive behavior is another category of behavior that animals can exhibit. It's extremely important for a lot of different reasons. And that's because it increases the chance that a certain male is going to pass on its genes to as many offspring as possible. So if you have a male that's kind of already the dominant male and he's worked really hard and gotten to, like, let's say the top of the pack or something, chances are he's probably a pretty healthy, physically fit individual. And so obviously those genes being passed on would probably be pretty beneficial, as opposed to the genes being passed on from like a weaker male who's maybe sick or not as physically in shape. So it's very important for animals, especially animals that are going to be surviving in the wild, that you have the right genes being passed on. So reproductive behavior will increase the chance that a certain male will pass on its genes. It also increases the chance that female gametes will be fertilized. It restricts mating to within the species, because that's really important. Not all species can crossbreed necessarily, but if they can, you want to kind of try to restrict it within the species unless there's a specific purpose. So each female is going to kind of, and male will recognize behaviors that are specific to their species. So this could also include courtship behavior prior to mating. Like I said, that's kind of like that, a part of that kind of keeping it within the species behavior. A good example of the courtship behavior prior to mating that I always kind of use is birds. If you like Google, there's some bird, and I can't remember, but a lot of birds will do like crazy dances and all kinds of things to kind of court the female. It's kind of funny. I had to watch some of those in college. So then other behaviors that are related to reproduction would be like mounting, intromission, and insemination. And then, of course, parental behaviors to feed and protect their offspring. Be familiar with this slide and these bullet points that are all part of reproductive behavior and why it's important. So animals also have a lot of different ways that they can communicate, because obviously they don't necessarily talk. So there are a lot of ways that they can communicate with each other or even with other species as well. So there's auditory detection, which would be the hearing of vocalization or noises made by another animal. And then responding to mating calls would be an example of that. Olfactory detection, which would be when they smell pheromones or other scents that are maybe being put off by other animals. So a good example of that would be marking territory. So like how dogs always pee on a tree that other dogs have peed on like 20 times. It's because they smell it and they're like, okay, no, I'm going to mark over this. The response of bulls to the urine of cows that are in heat, that kind of lets them know that that animal is in heat and that he needs to go ahead and like do his job. So it's very important for a different number of reasons. Visual detection of signaling movements. So an example of that would be submissive positioning in dogs. So if you ever see dogs play and like one of them kind of gets a little aggressive and then one of them kind of lays on its back, that's a submissive position. Head movements in birds. If you ever kind of around a lot of birds, they kind of like move their head a lot, which actually I had a friend who was like terrified of birds for that reason. She didn't like how they always like move their head weirdly. But so that is actually something that other birds can pick up on. And that can kind of signal to other birds that, you know, something's off or that, or everything's okay or whatever. And then various tactile interactions. So tactile basically just kind of means touching. So that would typically come into play between offspring and a parent, especially like when the mom like cleans off the newborn or something like that. All of that's going to be kind of that touch communication. So be familiar with this slide and know the different types of communication that animals can use. So stress, of course, we talked about a little bit in the beginning. So there are a lot of different behavioral responses to the two types of stresses, which are physical stress and a physiological stress or physiologic stress, same thing. And so the classic response to a stressor or to stress is going to be a large release in what's the stress hormone we've talked about before. Hint, hint, it's on the slide if you forgot. Cortisol? Cortisol, right. So anytime you hear stress and hormone, you think cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. So it's kind of important to make that association. So the typical response to any stress is definitely going to be a release in cortisol. And if you remember, corticosterone is kind of what it's called in poultry, but typically you're going to hear cortisol talked about a lot more. And it's just the type that's released in mammals. Basically, it protects the animal in a lot of different ways, but mainly I just want you to know that cortisol is the hormone that's going to be released in response to it. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, there are two different types of stress. There's physical stress and physiologic stress. So some examples of something that could cause a physical stress would be like extremes in temperature or low blood sugar, so low glucose. A physiologic stress could be like transportation. That could definitely stress animals out, especially if they're not being handled right. A new environment or just being handled in general. And then, of course, like dehorning in cattle, tail docking in sheep, etc. So I definitely want you to know the two different types of stress. And then I would like for you to probably be able to give me an example of each one of those. So it can be an extremely short example. I don't need a whole lot written. Say physical stress, extreme temperature, physiologic stress, new environment, or whatever. But definitely be familiar with this slide. So temperature control is also very important because that can cause a physical stress. And so domestic animals are homeotherms, and so they need to maintain their body temperature within a narrow range. And so basically, the thermoneutral zone is kind of that zone where an animal's temperature is within a comfortable range for their body processes and everything that needs to happen. And so when the temperature gets below or above the thermoneutral zone, you're going to have a lot of things that are going to start to happen to kind of get that body temperature back where it needs to be. So specifically, at temperatures above the thermoneutral zone, that means that the animal is getting way too hot and they need to start losing heat. You're going to see increasing evaporative heat loss, increased blood flow to the skin, and then behavioral responses such as like wallowing in ponds. And the classic example that people think about would be like pigs wallowing in mud. That'd be like your backyard pigs that are not in a temperature-controlled building or something. But if you have animals that are kind of out and they can do whatever they want, and you see them wallowing around in the ponds or cows standing in the pond all day, there's a good chance that they're getting pretty hot. So definitely know kind of those three things that animals can do when their temperature gets above the thermoneutral zone. Does anybody have any questions on this lecture? Okay. Okay, so the next lecture that we talked about was animal diseases. And again, I'm going to move pretty fast through this because there are only 17 questions from these three lectures. So we're not going to cover every single slide. But animal diseases, definitely we covered a lot of material. So quick overview on animal diseases. We talked about zoonotic diseases, which are infectious animal diseases that can cross species barriers. And this is extremely important because these diseases can cause serious diseases in people. And so bolded and underlined, giant hint there, probably going to see that. So definitely know what a zoonotic disease is and be familiar with that definition. So there are a lot of different ways that diseases can kind of be taken care of or prevented. Not always, but there are a lot of things that you can do to hopefully prevent the spread of disease in animals. And so there is a long list of different things you can do. So different mechanisms to combat animal disease. Good management, of course, is a must. Sanitation, biosecurity, which we'll talk about a little more in detail later. Proper vet care, monitoring and then depopulation in the event of an outbreak, meaning you may have to remove all the animals from that facility and let that facility be cleaned and then kind of sit empty for a given amount of time until that disease has kind of died off and is no longer present in that environment. Vaccines, making sure that you're vaccinating animals properly. And along with that, always make sure that if you're vaccinating, try not to vaccinate around a particularly stressful event in that animal's life, because if they're already stressed out, then their immune system is down, and that vaccine could actually make them kind of more sick, or kind of set them back a little bit. And we see that a lot in pigs, actually, where vaccines aren't necessarily always given at the proper time. Prophylactic drugs and then therapeutic drugs are also other ways to combat diseases. So make sure that you're kind of familiar with those. I may ask you for an example or two of things we can do to combat animal diseases. So some other definitions that we talked about. Epidemiology is just the science of the cause and spread and control of disease. We talked about the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. So an epidemic is an infectious disease that can spread rapidly and cause many people or animals to become sick or show clinical symptoms. A pandemic is an epidemic that has moved across the world. So it's moved to other continents and it's just completely spreading across the world. So make sure that you are familiar with especially epidemic and pandemic, and know the difference between those two, and the definitions for both of those, okay? Anybody have a question on that? Because I know sometimes epidemic and pandemic can kind of get a little confusing. All good? Okay. So zoonosis, again, or zoonotic diseases are just infectious diseases that can be spread from animals to people. I will also say they can go the other way. They can be spread from people to animals. It's just any disease that can cross species barriers. Again, I think I've probably mentioned in class before, I always have to get a flu shot because they're concerned that if I get the flu, I could actually make pigs sick. So they're not so much worried about me getting sick from the pigs as me making them sick if I'm going to a lot of different farms. So zoonotic disease is basically just a disease that can cross species barriers. So one of those diseases that we talked about was mad cow disease, and it has a lot of different names that we talked about in different species. So you can kind of just know it as BSE or mad cow. And so that's a prion-based disease. So remember we talked about prion diseases and what prions are. So basically prions are an infectious agent, but they're made of protein. So basically it's this protein that if it was folded correctly would be a normal protein. But what happens in the case of prions is that it's a protein that has been folded in an abnormal way. And so that abnormal folding is what kind of gives it the property of being infectious. So that abnormal folding can often occur in the nervous system, which is what causes that progressive degeneration of the nervous system and the brain, and causes the symptoms that you would see with mad cow. So be familiar with what a prion is, that it's an abnormally folded protein that can become infectious, and that it's associated with mad cow disease. So we talked about just a lot of different diseases. I'm not going to ask you specifics really about those diseases. We talked about parasites and different ways to prevent all the different parasites, which is pretty detailed. So one thing I do want to hit on that's really important, especially if you have livestock that are grazing, so if you have like sheep or cattle, you want to make sure that you're deworming them. So it's also known as worming or drenching, and it's basically just when you're giving an anthelmintic drug or a dewormer, and that's to rid them of parasites or parasitic worms. Just some examples would be like roundworms, flukes, or tapeworms. And so you want to make sure that the type of dewormer you're using, the level you're giving, and everything is appropriate for your environment, because certain parasites may be more prevalent in your pasture versus someone else's. So you always want to have a good handle on what's present and then how to deal with it and make sure you're dealing with it appropriately. Deworming schedule is also extremely important because different parasites have kind of different life cycles, and so when you need to kind of intervene. So you want to make sure that if you have animals that are out on pasture, that you stick to a good deworming schedule, and that you are worming them. So know what deworming is. Definitely be familiar with that because you'll see that. These are just some of the different parasites that we talked about. We've covered fly strike before on another exam. That could show up from an old question possibly. So we also talked about non-infectious diseases because not all diseases have to be caused by a bacteria or anything. There are a lot of metabolic diseases. Milk fever was the big one that we talked about that can occur. It can occur in other animals, but typically dairy cattle are kind of the main one that we see it in. When I learned about it in school, dairy cattle were kind of the classic example. And so milk fever is a metabolic disease that occurs at the transition between late pregnancy and early lactation. And so basically it causes low calcium in the blood because all of that calcium is going into milk production. So the animal is not going to actually have enough for herself. So a good way to treat that is just with injection of calcium borogluconate, just to kind of booster those calcium levels right before they're needed. But so definitely be familiar with milk fever. I want you to know that it's a metabolic disease, not an infectious disease. It's metabolic. And I want you to know that it occurs at the transition between late pregnancy and early lactation. Any questions on that lecture? Okay. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions at all. This is your last chance for any questions before the exam, and I'd be happy to answer them. So the last chapter that we went over in this section was on animal health, therapeutics, immunology, and vaccines. So there has been a big shift in the thinking from treating clinical diseases to disease prevention. And I would definitely say that that is a really, really important thing, thinking about preventing it. I work with a variety of different customers, and I have some that are more on the side of let's prevent things before they can happen. And then I have others that are more reactive and they just want to treat it if it happens. So it's really all about where you stand on that. But I do think that prevention is key, especially when it comes to disease, because you don't want to have to deal with it when it happens. So there are a lot of different steps to promote animal health, which we've touched on before. Biosecurity is a really, really big one. So biosecurity is a series of measures that's attempting to prevent pathogens that are from reaching a herd or a flock of animals. So biosecurity is extremely important, and I would say it's more so important for chickens, or any poultry really, chickens, turkeys, and swine as well. Because if you think about it, those animals are group housed. They're in very large buildings with lots of animals in that building. And if one of them gets a disease, pretty much there's a good chance that all of them are going to get that disease. And so biosecurity is extremely important. And it goes as far as even with trucks going between farms. Those trucks have to be sprayed down. They get clean. Out in Eastern North Carolina, diseases can go from even different hog producers, like from Smithfield to a smaller farmer, if their trucks pass on the highway and they haven't been cleaned, and those trucks have been to a farm with a disease and they just meet somewhere on the highway, that truck can then carry that disease to a different farm. So it's extremely important. There are so many measures that need to be taken. Again, like I said, in my job, whenever I go to visit like a breeding herd, or the like baby pigs, I have to shower in and leave all of my clothes that I came in with. Shower in, put on clothes that are at the farm, and boots and everything that are at the farm. And then when I leave, I have to shower back out and leave those clothes there, and then put on the clothes I came in with and leave. Some places will even go so far as you cannot pull up to the barn until your car has been sprayed down with disinfectant. Tires, car has to be washed, everything. You have to get, I've been some places where I had to get a set of like boot covers just to get out of the car. And then from the parking lot to the door, I had to get another set of boot covers when I got in the door. And then I had to shower in and shower out. So it can be extremely important, but I understand that it's very, very important step in keeping animals from getting diseases, especially when you're going to a lot of farms. So vets, people in my position, nutritionists, anybody that's going to be going to a lot of farms, even farms within the same company, because you may have a farm that's 2 hours away that breaks with some disease, and even though it's kind of the same pig, same genetics, everything, same system, you could carry that from barn to barn. So it's very important, and it's also important with chickens. I've heard of people going to visit chicken houses where they were visiting like 3 different houses, and the customer actually made them shower between each barn on that site. So by the time they were done visiting the 3 barns, they had taken 6 showers. So people get very intense about it. So if you have animals, especially poultry or pigs, you want to make sure that you have a biosecurity plan in place. Even if you just have cattle, you want to make sure that, like, if you're getting new animals, that you kind of quarantine them so you make sure they're not bringing in any diseases to the herd. Lots of different things. But as you can tell, biosecurity is very important. So know what it is and why it's important. So different measures that I kind of talked about, I already hit on basically all of those. Limiting visitors is another one. Just as an FYI, if you have animals, try not to don't let people in just for the sake of going to see your animals just for fun. They need to be someone that's really there for a purpose, because anybody going in is a chance to bring disease in. We talked about immunology and different ways that animals are protected and can respond to a pathogen. A lot of this is pretty specific. A lot of it I didn't really go into until I learned more about immunology. Some things that I do want you to kind of take away from the immunology section would be this slide and these couple definitions. So I want you to be familiar with what an antigen is. And so that's basically just a molecule that will cause an immune response. So it's something that the body doesn't recognize. And then the antibody, which I want you to know that definition, is the protein that's going to be produced and used by the immune system to neutralize that pathogen. And then, of course, the pathogen is anything that can cause disease. But so definitely be familiar with those. You may see one or more of those definitions on the test, but I can promise you that something from this slide is on there. Be familiar with that. Talked about a lot of different diseases, a lot of different ways to combat diseases. And I think that is going it. There's the new material that I'm going to have on your test. So does anybody have any questions on that?
So is there going to be like this test 3, and then is there going to be a cumulative exam?
Sorry, you kind of went out a little bit there. Can you say that again?
So is this test 3 going to be our semester exam, or are we going to have a separate semester exam covering?
This is just the review part for your final. So you already had like your exams 1, 2, 3. So this material, basically the final is going to be accumulative on everything, but because this last section is such a small amount of material, that's going to go on your final and just 17 questions. So this will all be that one final exam. So you'll have 40 questions of all the old stuff from the, like test 1, 2, and 3, all that material. And then you're just going to have 17 questions on this new material because it's just a small amount. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
It's not related to this, but I was trying to remember, what was difficulty weaning? What was the word for that?
Difficulty weaning?
Was it weaning? No, it was calving, I think it was.
Yes, dystocia.
Okay.
Yep, difficulty calving is called dystocia. that was a word that like stuck with me from intro. And our teacher was like a beef cattle guy, and so he really talked about that a lot. And that's also important. Like I think I probably mentioned it in the EPD lecture, because when you're looking at mating animals, you don't want to mate like a bull that has really high birth weights to a heifer, because that's just a recipe for dystocia. So any other questions on material or anything you've done in the other exams? If you're going through your other exams and you see something that you're confused about that you missed, email me and make sure that you have that, that you understand that and everything leading up to the final exam. And definitely use those old exams as a study guide, because that's what I thought was important from all of that material. So good chance that's what I'm going to think is important for that material in the final. So any more questions at all about anything? Everybody knows when the test is, when your last assignment's due. I'm going to try to go ahead and grade everything as fast as I can when I get a chance, so you'll be able to see where your assignments and everything kind of stand, where your grade, what your grade's looking like. But so if nobody has any other questions about the test, and if you do, again, shoot me an email if you have any questions leading up to the exam. So I did want to go ahead and mention before I forget, if anybody is at all looking for jobs at any point in time, one of my customers, he's a very big swine producer in North Carolina, actually has a farm in Norlina. It's actually about 45 minutes from the Alberta campus, I believe. Actually, I think it's like 30-something minutes. I looked it up the other day. It's not very far, and they're constantly looking for people there. So if you want to get involved in agriculture, if you kind of want to take that route, they're always looking for people to help, and it would be a really good job. It would get you some commercial hog production experience, and it's working at a sow farm, so it'd be working with their breeding herd. So the sows and the piglets, which are always fun because they're super cute. So if anybody is interested in that, I kind of told him, because they're always looking for people, but they're all obviously in North Carolina, so they weren't even aware of Southside Virginia Community College or anything. So I mentioned it and said that I could kind of gauge interest to see if it's something anybody may be interested in. And if so, then I could definitely put you in touch with the boss. So if it's anything anybody's interested in at all and you kind of live in that area, and it'd be a decent commute for you, I could find out more information or shoot me an email if you're interested, or if you know of anybody else that's interested. Definitely be a good way to get some experience if you want to be in the swine industry, which is a big industry, especially in North Carolina. North Carolina is second in the country for hog production. So it would definitely be good to get that experience. Any questions on that? I know I didn't give you a whole lot of information on that, but I'm kind of just trying to gauge like some interest. If you know, what do you think, Tom? Like, do you think there are any students that are interested in animal science, or is it kind of more just agribusiness type stuff?
There's a few of them, but as far as going specifically into pigs, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I don't really have as good a feel for the online students as I do the seated students for what they're thinking.
Right. Well, I just want to throw that out there because they're looking for people. And when I mentioned that there was a community college there that had an agribusiness, program that also had an animal science class, they got super excited. And so, I mean, even if they needed to come in and like give a little spiel about it or talk to anybody, just kind of wanted to make that connection. So if anybody knows of anybody, just let me know. But so I guess really quickly, if you all care or want to hear about it, I can kind of go over kind of what my job is. Tom, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. Just to introduce, I was talking to Dr. Dalton about Dr. Brooks a while ago, and we were just talking about that her job, we talk about animal science, we talk about agribusiness, but just what she does with her day job is a pretty interesting indication of some of the kinds of things that you might encounter as far as job options and job opportunities and what you day-to-day might be, because she's not farming. She's agribusiness, but she's not farming. And so just she and I, Dr. Dalton and I got to talking. We thought it would be good for her Dr. Brooks, to talk to y'all for a few minutes about what she does.
Yep.
Just to get another perspective.
Yeah, and I'd love to do that because typically when people think animal science, they're like, "Oh, you must be a vet." That's the
Yep.
question I get all the time, and I'm like, "No, I started out as pre-vet because I didn't know. I thought, okay, animal science, vet or farmer, right? Those are my options." And so I didn't realize until I actually got well into my last year of my undergraduate that you could go to like graduate school or even right out with a bachelor's or anything, even associates. There are so many jobs in animal science and in agriculture. And so there are a lot of jobs that could find kind of whatever scenario you want. So with my job, what I do, I'm a consulting swine nutritionist. So basically, I got my degrees in animal science, and then I kind of moved into more degrees in nutrition. So I got very specified in nutrition, in case you couldn't tell from how long it took me to do the nutrition lecture. But if it's any consolation, actually, I hated nutrition in undergrad. It was my least favorite subject. And I was like, I'm absolutely never doing anything with nutrition. This sucks. But here I am. So don't rule anything out. Just because it's hard or just because you think you don't like it, you never know. So be open to everything. But so basically what I do in my job, which people always find it hilarious when I tell them I'm a swine nutritionist because so many people don't realize that's a thing, is I have different customers that are the actual hog producers, so the farmer, that have a lot of animals. And so those animals need to be fed. So what I do is I do their nutrition work. So I have a software where I do the actual feed formulation. So I kind of consult on things all the way from ingredient purchasing. So what ingredients are available, what's the quality of the corn, testing it for mycotoxins, telling the producer what price they can kind of use to bid on that corn with, or what price that will fit into the formula if they're looking at a different ingredient. We look at different suppliers. We test different loads of corn and make sure that it's good corn. And then, of course, you have the feed mill that is going to actually make the feed. And this is the same for poultry and, really, I mean, cattle is just a little bit different because they're mostly on pasture, but there are still feed mills that make the concentrates for the cattle. But like chickens and pigs, everything that they're getting is being made at a feed mill because they're not out on pasture. So I have to understand all of the nutrition and the recommendations, nutritional requirements for that animal at different stages of production. So you're going to feed like your breeding herd a certain way. You're going to feed baby pigs a certain way. And then as the animals get older, their nutrient requirements are going to change. So I have to understand all of that and take that in consideration when I formulate, as well as the prices of all the ingredients, because I want to get it at the best cost for the producer that I can. So all of that, I also have to go to the feed mills. I have to understand how the feed mills work and all of the machinery that's there. So just to kind of touch on a couple of jobs of people that I interact with also, because I kind of span all of these areas. You have people that are like ingredient brokers that kind of help different people purchase ingredients. Different operations could have someone who is solely in charge of purchasing ingredients. At the feed mills, you typically will have someone who has the job of quality assurance and quality control. So that person would be the person that's sampling all of the ingredients as they come in, and making sure that everything is going right in the mill so that things are not getting contaminated or anything like that. Another job you could have at the feed mill would be the actual feed mill manager. So the person that oversees the operations of the feed mill. You'll have a maintenance person that does the maintenance for all the equipment at the feed mill. You'll typically have a person that does like delivery and loadout schedules, that understands truck drivers and how those schedules work. Different companies will also have truck drivers. So my dad's a truck driver, but he works for a different company that has nothing to do with agriculture typically. But each, like Smithfield, for example, that produces hogs, they have their own truck drivers that carry feed back and forth to farms from the feed mills. So that's another job. So lots of jobs even within the feed mill. And then you've got what I do, which is the nutrition work. You've got people that handle pricing. You've got account managers. If you're kind of more the agribusiness side of it and you want to be more of the business type person, every account that I have has someone that handles and pays the bills, and keeps track of all of that, and that sends checks out to people and does all of the accounting work. So that's extremely important. Then when you get down to, typically with my job, you'll have one nutritionist, and then you can go out to production. So you'll have a production manager who's kind of over all of production. And then under him, you'll have like your kind of service manager that's kind of over all of your service guys. Service people are the people that go out. If you're actually a contract grower, Yusef, you may have a service person that comes out to see y'all. So you'll typically have a service person that will be responsible for a certain number of barns that they go visit. And basically all that person does is they go out and they make sure that waterers look good. They're at the right height. The feed is, the feeder looks like it's set properly. All of the animals that needed to be treated have been treated. All the animals are in the pens they're supposed to be in, that kind of stuff. So they basically go out and help the contract growers do everything that they're supposed to do correctly. They make sure that feed's getting delivered properly and on time. They kind of help handle the feed budgets. So they help tell the contract grower, this is how much you feed of this feed, and then when to order more feed. And then kind of manage the flow of pigs. So how long are these pigs going to be in your facility? Once they're gone, when is your next group coming in? All of that. And I've met service people that only got as far as a high school diploma. And that's still a really good job. And it pays pretty well too. So lots of different jobs that I never knew existed until I got into my job now. And I work with all of these people. Under the service people, you're going to have for each barn, you're going to have a barn manager. And so that person is going to be in charge of all the employees that work in a specific barn. So all the way down to the employees that work at the barn. And so the job that I'm talking about, you'd start off as an employee at the barn, but as you can see, there is a very clear ladder that you can move up if you get that experience in a particular area. Because there are so many jobs that go into animal production and agriculture that pretty much once you get your foot in the door, you can pretty much put yourself in just about any job within that system that you would want to be in or that you'd be interested in. Of course, like my job and some of the feed mill jobs sometimes require some training, of course. And then my job does require a good bit of school. But there are plenty of jobs that you can get right out of high school with an associate's, bachelor's. So if there's a job that you want, go for it, and start somewhere, and then you can figure out what you want to do. I really didn't completely figure out that I wanted this job until I got a lot of different experiences, and then started realizing kind of what I wanted to do. And so my job's fun because as a consulting nutritionist, I get to do all of the nutrition work, but I also kind of get to bridge the gap between the people on the farm and the people at the feed mill and the people in the offices, because I kind of understand a little bit of the whole system. Whereas sometimes the production people get very focused on their production area. Feed mill people are very focused at the feed mill. And so someone kind of has to bridge that gap and understand all of it. Other jobs that I run into, people that I interact with, would be there are people that sell feed additives. There are a ton of companies that make products for animals. If you have any animals, you've probably been visited by these people. They sell products like probiotics for animals. They sell vaccines, anything that you can think of. They're going to have sales reps. They're going to have technical service people that go out to the farms and talk to people. So if you really enjoy talking to people and you have that outgoing personality, that's a job that might be for you. So just lots of different things that I never really ever thought of until I was in my position now. And I realized there are so many jobs in agriculture and animal science that it's just crazy. And there's an extremely high demand as well for those jobs. Like I can't tell you how many people contact me all the time asking if I know of anybody that wants to do this job or this job, because it's a really good field to be in. People are always going to need to eat. So job security is pretty good. But yeah, so if you ever have any questions about what jobs are out there other than vet and farmer, because those were kind of the only ones I was aware of, please talk to me, because I love to have those conversations with people and kind of help you figure out what jobs would be a good fit for you. Because there are a lot, and like I said, there's a very high demand. So once you get your foot in the door, the possibilities are pretty much endless for what opportunities you can have. So with that spiel, any questions? I also get to work with animals a lot too, because I do visit farms. If they're having problems with animals not eating or something like that, I need to go to farms and kind of check their ventilation, which I'm not a ventilation expert. Actually, believe it or not, ventilation expert is a job. There are people that specifically go out to barns and just look at ventilation, and they will help you fix any ventilation problems that you're having. That's extremely important for pigs and poultry. But I have to go out. Whenever an animal gets sick, the first thing they think of is the feed did it. So I have to be able to go to the farm and either say, okay, yeah, something happened. The feed got moldy in a bin, or I made a mistake, which hopefully I didn't. But if I didn't and everything looks good from my end, I need to be able to go to a farm on site, and I need to be able to pick out what could be causing the problem that they're having. So I do get to interact with the actual animals at the farm. I also kind of help out with different research trials. Companies that make feed additives are always doing research at different barns. Actually, the Norlina farm job that I was talking about is going to be potentially turned into a research facility. So you would get a lot of commercial farm experience as well as research experience, which would set you up for a whole handful of jobs in the future. But so that's basically kind of what I do in a nutshell without rambling on for like 2 hours. So any questions or anything about other job opportunities or like jobs that are out there, anything that interests y'all that you kind of want me to touch on? Or you probably just want to get out of here and you're tired of listening to me talk. Okay, I think I threw a lot of information at you, but just know that there's a lot out there, and that you don't necessarily just have to be a vet. It's basically my summary, conclusion statement. So,
yeah.
All right.
That.
Was that okay, Tom?
Oh yeah. No, I was just agreeing. You don't have to be a vet, but
yeah.
But yeah, there's a whole lot of jobs out there that
there are a lot.
You don't necessarily think about all the different kinds of jobs.
Yeah, I had no idea. And there is such a high demand for it that, like, if anyone is interested in anything, if anything I said sounds remotely interesting, definitely let me know, because there's such a high demand.
And just as far as you're sort of semi-self-employed,
kind
working
of
with that other guy, or?
Yeah, so my boss was self-employed. He started this consulting business like 23 years ago, but he's about to retire. So he actually sold it to a much larger company called Alltech. It's Alltech. The one with one L makes bucket trucks, so it's not that one.
Okay.
But Alltech is a bigger company. They're in like 129 countries. They make feed additives and things like that. And so they bought my boss's company, but we still operate independently within the large company. So this company has thousands and thousands of employees, but there are actually only 4 people in the company that do what I do. So it's me, my boss, and then we have 2 other people. One is in China and one lives in Missouri, but he handles Russia. So we're pretty much independent. They pretty much leave us alone. I basically set my own schedule, other than when I'm still being trained by my boss. So when my boss says we're going to Pennsylvania this week, that's what I'm doing. But once he retires, I'll definitely completely be setting my own schedule. And I've been training for a year already. So I'd say probably a little more than 3/4 of my time is me setting my own schedule. And so that's just going out to customers whenever I need to go out. There's one an hour and a half away from me that I am contracted to see 3 times a month. So I go there almost every week. I have another one an hour away that wants me to come out almost every week. So I do that. We have to go to Pennsylvania once every other month. So it's kind of just how the contracts are set up. And then I also have work from home days like today. I have other days where I'm going to conferences, so I'll go to like Iowa or Indiana or Nebraska. So going to conferences to kind of keep up on the latest research, and conferences, a lot of them are where all the companies that make different products will come and try to meet with you to get you to convince the farmers to use their product. So it's good because I get to become aware of all the products that are out there. So if a particular issue comes up, I know who to call at what company to get me that product. But it's very flexible. A lot of animal science jobs are pretty flexible. Like unless you're working at a farm and you kind of have, semi-set hours, if you're like a sales rep or a technical service person or anything like that, even a service person, it's like there are a lot of setting your own schedule jobs that have a lot of flexibility, which I really like. And especially like people that have kids or anything else, there are a lot of jobs you can get that will really work and fit really well with your schedule and kind of give you that flexibility and that independence. And I like it because I never have the same day twice, ever. So every day is a new issue, new challenge or something, or I'm going to a different place. So it's fun. But yeah, so I'm not necessarily my own boss, but I do have a lot of flexibility there. And my boss is planning to retire in April. So I've got to get very up to speed very, very fast. But I'll be setting me even more of my own schedule once he retires. But right now it's like he says jump and I'm like, how high? So all the perks of being right out of school and having to actually learn about how things really work.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's basically kind of what I do.
Okay. Anybody else have anything?
I think they're tired of hearing me talk.
There may be that, but just remember, no class this Wednesday. The online test will be available starting this Wednesday, and us seated people will take the test next Monday at 11 a.m.
Yeah. And feel free to email me if you have any questions, or even if it's next semester and you're thinking about a job or something and you have questions about anything I talked about, today, feel free to let me know.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it. We all have a good
Okay. Yeah. Bye, everybody. See some of y'all in a little bit.